Hello, fourth grade, and welcome to lesson 3 for social studies. We are going to be talking about what conditions powered the Industrial Revolution. So right now we are working in chapter 2. And in this lesson, you're going to use your investigative skills to explore inventions that helped bring about the Industrial Revolution, reading and talking about how new technology, inventors and businesses work together during the Industrial Revolution will help you understand the foundations of the modern world. And you'll be able to explain what conditions were in place that allowed the Industrial Revolution to happen. Let's go ahead and flip to page 76 in our workbooks. Now we're going to be reading about the Erie Canal. While you read, look at the title and the image. What do they tell you about the subject that you're going to read about? Find reasons that the Erie Canal was needed. So if you don't want to highlight, you can circle this information. And for underline, it says, find the benefits provided by the canal as it was being built and afterward. Then for part 2, where it says find evidence, reread, how did the Erie Canal influence people and industries of the northeastern United States? Circle the length of the trip between Albany and Buffalo, and then draw. What did the boats that traveled the Erie Canal look like? How were they powered? So you don't need to do it on a separate piece of paper. You can draw it kind of in the space below under the picture in your workbook, or you can do it in your notebooks. Let's go ahead and read about the Erie Canal. Early Americans used rivers to travel and transport goods. However, the rivers did not always go where people needed them to go. People solved that problem by digging canals. These were channels that connected rivers and lakes. The most famous was the Erie Canal in New York State. Because the land along the route was flat, engineers included 83 locks. Locks raise or lower water so boats can travel from one level of water to another level of water. Workers completed the Erie Canal in 1825. It created a waterway from the Great Lakes to the Atlantic Ocean. Mules or horses walked a path next to the canal to tow flat boats and barges down the canal. Later, steamboats traveled the canal. Passengers could travel 290 miles from Albany, New York to Buffalo, New York in just 5 days. Before the canal, such a trip took 2 weeks by wagon. The canal brought settlers farther west. They sent produce and other goods back and forth to the eastern cities. Shipping prices decreased by 90%. The canal also made New York City the nation's most popular seaport. DeWitt Clinton marked the opening of the Erie Canal by pouring water from Lake Erie into the Atlantic Ocean. Primary source, Low Bridge, everybody down. 15 years on the Erie Canal, we've hauled some barges in our day, filled with lumber, coal, and hay, and every inch of the way we know from Albany to Buffalo. Low Bridge, everybody down, Low Bridge, for we're coming to a town, and you'll always know your neighbor, and you'll always know your pal if you've ever navigated on the Erie Canal. In the bottom, we have a picture that's captioned Northeastern View of the Locks at Lockport, New York. So go ahead and circle the length of the trip between Albany and Buffalo. We can see over here on that first page that it's 290 miles. Any reasons why the Erie Canal was needed, you're going to find that in the first 2 paragraphs. And then we're going to go ahead and take a look at our next page. So we're going to be exploring more main ideas and key details. Now, the main idea for this section is that the Erie Canal had a great impact by connecting the Great Lakes to the Atlantic Ocean. That's going to be our main idea, that the Erie Canal had great impact by connecting the Great Lakes to the Atlantic Ocean. And we're going to look at some of the details. So we can go back to our reading and take a look. Now we know that at first, flatboats and barges traveled on the canal, and later, steamboats were able to use the canal. We also learned that the time of travel between Albany to Buffalo went from being 2 weeks long to being only 5 days long. As we read on, we also see that the canal brought settlers farther west. And because of the canal, shipping prices decreased by 90%. So that's going to be your main idea and your key details for this section. Now, for the next page, on page 79, we're going to read pages 84 to 93 in our research companion. That's our textbook. And we're going to use our investigative skills to look for details in the text that will help you identify a main idea. And we're going to use the chart or graphic organizer down here to fill it in. So we're going to have 3 main ideas, which I will give you at the end of our reading. And then you will go in and fill in the key details that are related to those main ideas. So each main idea, you need to find 3 details that are related to it. Let's go ahead and switch over to our textbook. And we're going to read under the heading, Start of the Industrial Revolution. Before the 1700s, people made their own tools and many of the goods they used. Almost all workers worked in their homes, small shops, or the fields. They traveled by horse and buggy or by boat. The power that fueled this work came from human or animal efforts. Then some big innovations led to the Industrial Revolution. One of the first industries to undergo changes was the textile or cloth making industry in Britain. New machines could produce cloth quicker than before. Workers gathered in factories to manufacture products rather than working in their homes. Cities grew in size and workers moved to take factory jobs. Later, the coming of the locomotive and the steamboat led to great changes in transportation. All of this took place over a period of more than 100 years. The Industrial Revolution soon spread from Britain to the rest of Europe and to the United States. The technological advances of the Industrial Revolution changed the world and made a foundation for modern times. So let's stop and think about what we read in this section. So the start of the Industrial Revolution brought with it a lot of changes that changed not only the way people worked, but the way they lived. People weren't working in their home. They weren't making everything they needed on their own anymore. Now there were factories and things that were able to make those products a lot faster than they could make them by hand at home. Mainly, one of the first things that was impacted was the cloth making. So for things like clothing, anything you needed fabric for, all of that took off when they were able to make these things a lot faster in factories. So people weren't making them at home and working out of their homes anymore. Now they were leaving home or moving closer to a factory so they could work in the factory instead. Let's take a look at our timeline here at the top of our page. In 1790, Samuel Slater opens his textile mill. In 1825 is when the Erie Canal opened. In 1844, Samuel Morse sends the first telegraph. And in 1876, Alexander Graham Bell introduces the telephone. And in 1879, Thomas Edison introduces the incandescent light bulb. So you can see over this period, there were a lot of major things changing that started in Europe and spread out from there. Factories and textile mills. Before the Industrial Revolution, textiles were made in small businesses in homes. Merchants purchased wool from sheep farmers. Women ran spinning wheels in their homes to create thread. Merchants then took the thread to be woven into fabric on hand looms. Dyers added colors to the cloth. It was a slow, time-consuming process. The inventions and innovations of the Industrial Revolution brought important change to the way cloth was produced. In England, Richard Arkwright patented the water frame in 1769. It powered a spinning machine with running water. It ran large machines like this. Manufacturers built textile mills. To run large machines like this, manufacturers built textile mills or factories on riverbanks. American textile factories first appeared in the Northeast, where businessmen had the money or capital to build factories and buy raw materials like cotton. So let's stop and take a look at what we read in these first two paragraphs. In the first paragraph, it describes how people used to make cloth before and all the steps they took to make it. And then once the Industrial Revolution began, Richard Arkwright created or patented something called the water frame. And this helped to power these machines so that they could make the cloth in factories rather than doing it individually and using this very slow process at home. So down here, one of our first vocabulary words that we're running into for this lesson is the word raw materials. Samuel Slater worked in one of Arkwright's factories in England. He came to the United States in 1789, and he used his knowledge of Arkwright's machines to construct spinning machines in this country. Slater built his own factory in 1793. Soon, Samuel Slater's factory produced cotton faster than anyone else in the United States. As others copied his methods, Slater's success marked the beginning of industrialization in the United States. So Samuel Slater took the concepts that he learned about Richard Arkwright's factory, and he brought it over to the United States and replicated it or copied it there so that he could also have a textile mill where they're producing these different kinds of cloth a lot faster. And that was one of the signs that began the Industrial Revolution in the United States. In their words, Harriet Robinson, the working hours of all the girls extended from 5 o'clock in the morning until 7 in the evening, with 1/2 hour each for breakfast and dinner. Even the Doffers, who were child laborers, were forced to be on duty nearly 14 hours a day. So those were some of the hours that girls and women were working in these factories. Children worked with machinery in textile mills. And you can see the kids over here standing at the different parts of the machine. Some mills were powered by moving water using a water wheel. And you can see that in the picture here. Lowell, Massachusetts. In Waltham, Massachusetts, Francis Cabot Lowell opened a textile mill that combined both spinning and weaving under one roof. After he died, the mill owners built a town near the factory and named it Lowell. Designed just for the mill workers and their families, it had a library, a hospital, and boarding houses. Women called Lowell girls and young children worked in the factories and lived in Lowell. They earned less than men and worked longer hours with machines that could be dangerous. Interchangeable parts. In the 1790s, Eli Whitney invented the system of interchangeable parts. This system brought a change to manufacturing beyond the textile industry. Interchangeable parts were identical pieces of machinery that could be assembled quickly. Soon, many American industries adopted it. As more goods became available, the prices dropped. More people could afford these goods. More customers meant more products needed to be produced. New factories opened, making shoes, furniture, tools, and other products. Steam power. Factories powered by river currents did not always run at the same rate. During dry seasons, the flow of the rivers decreased. Machines were left without power. The invention of the steam engine solved this problem. Steam power relied on water and a way to heat the water up to its boiling point. The steam from the boiling water caused pressure to move machine parts. Since steam power did not depend on moving water of rivers, it worked on a steady schedule. Factories could also be built farther away from the flowing rivers and go wherever the workers were. Steam on the rivers. Steam was not only used in textile mills and factories, soon it was powering transportation. American Robert Fulton brought steam power to a boat named the Clermont in 1807. The Clermont had side wheels that served as paddles. A steam engine turned the side wheels. The Clermont became the first successful steamboat. Before the steam engine, boats typically floated along the current of rivers. Steam engines allowed boats to travel upriver against the current. Before long, steamboats traveled on rivers everywhere, reducing travel time. Most American rivers, however, ran in a north-south direction. To move goods east and west, people built artificial rivers called canals. The Erie Canal in New York, for example, connected the Great Lakes to the Atlantic Ocean. Transporting goods across the country became cheaper and faster. So let's review what we read on this page. Initially, boats were basically powered by paddling. So you needed to row the boat with the paddles to go in a certain direction. And unfortunately, you could generally only move in the direction that the water was flowing. With the invention of steamboats, now they could use the steam to power these side wheels that kind of worked as paddles, and they could use that to flow even upriver against the current in the opposite direction of the water if they needed to get to a certain area. This wasn't something that was easy for them to do before. And because they were creating more of these steamboats and a lot of travel by water, they also, like we said earlier, started to dig canals that connected these different rivers or these different bodies of water so that they could transport things in more of an east-west direction instead of the way rivers normally flowed, which was north and south. Railroad steam on the land. In addition to steam-powered ships and man-made canals, railroads were proving to be a fast way to move goods and raw materials. The coming of the railroad decreased activity on canals. The railroad brought a new era of trade and business to the country. At first, the railroad used horse-drawn cars along tracks. The first railroad in the United States, the Baltimore and Ohio, used horses to pull cars along tracks in 1828. By 1830, Peter Copper built the first steam locomotive in the United States. Cities in the Northeast, such as Boston, quickly laid railroad tracks. The tracks soon spread across the country. By the mid-1850s, railroad lines reached Chicago, St. Louis, and Memphis. By 1871, more than 45,000 miles of railroad tracks crisscrossed the country and allowed goods and raw materials to be shipped faster and more cheaply than ever before. This new invention would affect the life of every individual and change the population across the continent. Steam-powered trains could move people and goods. So once trains became more common, they were transporting things less by water and more using trains. Now, trains were originally pulled, they were different carts that were pulled by horses. And then once they applied that same steam power that they were using, they were able to build steam locomotives or steam trains. Locomotive is another word for train, to transport things across the country. And this became a very popular way of moving things and people to the point where between the time they started, so in 1830 is when Peter Cooper first built the first steam engine. By 1871, so this is 41 years later, there was 45,000 miles of railroad tracks across the entire country. So this means that people were able to travel farther, they were able to settle and live farther, they were able to move west and expand the population moving in a western direction across the United States, and so on. Innovations of the Northeast. Even before the Industrial Revolution, the Northeast had a history of innovation. For example, in colonial days, Benjamin Franklin invented the lightning rod and experimented with electricity. Later, with the inspiration of the Industrial Revolution fueling them, the new inventors of the Northeast were ready to make their contributions. 19th century inventions. In the 1830s, Samuel Morse made the telegraph a commercial success. He created a device that sent an electrical pulse along wires in a series of dots and dashes called Morse code. Operators on the receiving end translated the code into messages. Never before had people been able to send messages so quickly and easily. The Industrial Revolution laid the groundwork for the inventors that came after it. In 1876, Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone. The telephone used electric wires to instantly transmit speech. Telephones spread quickly. Businesses thrived with improved communication. Around the same time, Thomas Edison was working in his laboratory in Menlo Park, New Jersey. In 1877, he invented the phonograph to record and play sounds. In 1879, he invented the incandescent light bulb. Later, an African-American inventor named Lewis Latimer dramatically improved the light bulb. Edison also helped develop a motion picture camera and projector in 1888. In all, Edison and his team patented 1,093 inventions during his long life. Margaret E. Knight was a female inventor who lived in Massachusetts in the 1800s. She invented the flat-bottom paper bag in 1868. During her lifetime, she earned 27 patents and designed nearly 90 inventions. The Industrial Revolution led to the inventions of led to the innovations of manufacturing and clothing. The sewing machines, as we know it today, were developed by Elias Howe in 1845. The sewing machine led to the mass production of clothing. African-American inventor Jan Ernest Matzelinger transformed the shoe industry. In 1883, he received a patent for a machine that made shoes. The machine increased the number of shoes one person could make in a day from 50 pairs to 700 pairs. Because this invention increased shoe production, the price of shoes dropped. Steel becomes king. English inventor Henry Bessemer created a method of producing stronger, lighter steel from iron in 1855. Steel could be mass-produced at low prices. Scottish immigrant Andrew Carnegie brought this method to the United States in the late 1800s. He found one of the first big American businesses, Carnegie Steel Company. By 1900, Carnegie was producing 1/4 of the nation's steel. The Industrial Revolution led to many inventions that changed life around the world. A steel mill in Pennsylvania. That's what you're seeing in the bottom picture. So you can see, once the Industrial Revolution really got rolling, all of these different inventions were happening, were coming up. People were inventing all sorts of different products that we still use today. The telegraph is still used. Telephones are still used, light bulbs, all of these different things, the different methods that they came up with to mass produce clothing, the different methods they came up to mass produce shoes. Steel is still a building material that we use commonly because it's very, very strong and it's much lighter weight than using just iron. Growth of cities. As a result of the Industrial Revolution, the landscape of the Northeast changed dramatically from how it looked in the late 1700s. Industry grew at an increasing speed, and more factories were built in the cities. Factories moved into cities. Steamboats chugged down rivers and canals, bringing goods to market, raw materials to factories, and people to cities. Railroad lines crossed the land, helping businesses grow bigger and more profitable. Northeastern cities, including New York, Boston, and Philadelphia, were rail centers and had bustling ports. Ships from around the world brought goods to these ports, and trade with other countries grew. Problems multiply. Cities grew rapidly, helped by booming businesses. The Industrial Revolution also spurred urbanization, or the movement of people from rural areas to cities. Immigrants from European countries arrived in the United States, and many of them settled in the big cities. Population of the nation grew by 36% in the 1840s alone. Cities faced problems because of such rapid growth. Streets filled with filth and sewage systems overflowed. People had trouble finding clean drinking water. Because of the crowded conditions, disease spread quickly. So unfortunately, with a lot of the good that came with the Industrial Revolution, there was a good amount of bad that came with it as well. Because people were moving out of their rural areas where they had their farms and all of these, and they were moving into more urban areas, such as big cities, those cities became overpopulated. Now, with that huge influx of people, with all of those people moving in so quickly, things like the sewage systems were not equipped to deal with that many people living there. People had issues finding clean drinking water. The cities were not ready to support that many people, and the people moved in very quickly because they were moving in for jobs, to live closer to factories, and all of these things. And because it was happening so quickly, they weren't able to adapt as quickly as they needed to in the beginning. Effects of the Industrial Revolution. Business growth sometimes had an impact on workers. Laws did not prevent children from working in factories. Hours were long and pay was low. With no safety rules in place, workers were injured or even killed by dangerous machinery. The families of those killed were not compensated or paid for their losses. Waste from industry polluted rivers and darkened the skies with black smoke. Still, the success of the Industrial Revolution or industrialization allowed companies to grow. New methods of financing large businesses developed. The number of products available grew. The Industrial Revolution created a new economy that required more workers. A new class of workers developed, the middle class. The middle class worked skilled jobs and earned enough money to buy more goods than before. The Industrial Revolution in America laid the groundwork for the modern world. And down here at the bottom, we can see different kinds of street transportation in the 1900s. Now let's think about what we read in this section. So because the Industrial Revolution brought all of these products, it created all of these jobs. It did some good for people where now people were able to afford different things that they weren't able to afford before because the prices dropped now that they could be made in large quantities. People had more job opportunities because they could work in factories. But the problem was there were no rules in place to keep people safe about making sure they're working a reasonable number of hours. What would happen if someone was injured or killed while they were at work? The pollution that was being caused by these different factories, all of these are different effects from the Industrial Revolution. So there were some good effects and there were some bad effects that came from it. We're going to go back over here and we're going to have 3 main idea slots. So I'm going to give you the 3 main ideas that we're going to cover, and then you will go back into the text and find your supporting details or your key details. So for our first one, for our first main idea, we're going to put the first phase of the Industrial Revolution involved building factories. So tell me about the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, about building those factories, where they were built. Tell me about interchangeable parts. We read about that as well. Tell me about what it did for how fast things were being produced. For the second main idea, we're going to talk about the improvements in transportation that happened during the Industrial Revolution. So tell me about transportation, about how people were being moved around, how goods and materials were being moved around during that time period. And your last main idea was that the Industrial Revolution had many lasting effects on society. So go back to what we were just reading. We're going to write about the Industrial Revolution's effects on society, and you're just going to give me 3 of them. We did talk about more than 3, so you can pick any 3 that we read about. Make sure you're using neat handwriting when you fill in these boxes, please. Now for our next pages, in our Write About It section, what conditions marked the launch of the Industrial Revolution? So tell me about different inventions that had to do with the textile industry. Tell me about the factory systems, raw materials, about people moving to cities. Tell me what started the Industrial Revolution. What was the setting like? What were the conditions like that made it possible for it to grow? For the next question, where it says write and cite evidence, how did the Industrial Revolution evolve as new inventions and developments became available? Use facts from your text to help you complete your response. So here again, you can talk about the textile industry, about making cloth. You can talk about steam engines and railroads. You can talk about different kinds of transportation, about the growth of cities. You can include a lot of information here. Just make sure you're using complete sentences and neat handwriting while you do it. And for the pull it together section under where it says connect to the essential question, what conditions in the Industrial Revolution caused people to move to the Northeast over time? So think about why people would move there. Think about the jobs. Think about the railroads being built, about shipping costs, about city growth. All of those are different things you can pick from to answer this question. That takes us to the end of this lesson. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, have a great day, fourth grade. Take care. Bye-bye.